Deciding whether or not to use an editor is such an important decision. It's definitely a quality decision, but it's also a budget decision, because if you use an editor, you're going to be allocating a chunk of money for that purpose. In theory, I could have done the editing on the book myself, because I've done a lot of that work before. I'm very experienced, but I chose to use an editor because I think however good a writer you are, everybody can benefit from the viewpoint of another person who really knows what they're talking about. I used an editor to do a structural edit, first of all, and I think that was one of the most valuable parts of the process for me. It made a lot of difference to the end point that became the book. And then the same editor later on did a copy edit for me just before we were ready to go to publication. I think perhaps the most important thing is choosing the right editor for you and your book, because you're going to be getting a lot of critical feedback from that person. And by critical, I don't mean necessarily negative. A lot of the criticism may be positive feedback that's coming back, but it's going to be quite important to make that choice very carefully. So maybe I should just say a few things about how I eventually chose an editor. I started off with a list that was very long. I think there were about 30 or 40 names. The first thing I did was go through the names of the editors on that list and picked out the people who were particularly interested in the kind of book that I had written. So people that were interested in women's stories, biography and history, Australian history. That reduced the list down to, I think, about 15. Then I went through and looked at what those people had written about themselves on their websites. And I looked through and picked out the examples where I thought their own writing was actually good, where they were writing about themselves in a way that was interesting and coherent, because I thought if they're going to be criticising my work and giving me feedback, that was an important criterion. That reduced the list down to, I think it was 3 people, and I'm pretty sure that those 3 editors, each of them would have done a good job for me. How did I reduce from 3 to 1? Well, the person that I approached I looked at their photographs, and I initially chose the person who had the kindest face. I thought that might be an important ingredient, and as it turned out, things worked out very well with the editor that I used. So my advice would be, even if you're a brilliant writer, choose a good editor.